All right, Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, agreed to join me, agreed to come back to talk to Karen Retrial. Thank you so much. I realize your time is valuable, and I know how much our viewers appreciate getting your perspective. You are deep into this case, you've been following it religiously, and your perspective is super important. And it kind of helps me sort of talk through when I talk through, what I see to hear other perspectives. I'm sure this is the same for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome to see how people can look at the same thing differently because then you start to understand how a jury gets back there. What are they arguing about? What are they picking up on? And when certain things seem obvious to me, they might not be to you and vice versa. So it's important to talk it out and not just stay in your own little bubble.
That is amazing too, especially with some of the people who are very deep on one side or the other, who are posting information about the case, how they can put something out there, and I'm like, wait, that's how you saw that? And it comes from such a slanted viewpoint, and it can be from either side. And, and I think sometimes it's hard to know where the actual truth falls in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's there. All the research shows that you can get a jury with you on your side, like as a lawyer, very early on in the case, and then they're going to see things the way you see them. They're going to dismiss things that other people may find important. And that's why it's really important to try to get them on your side, gain that credibility, and keep it through the witnesses and evidence and arguments you make as a lawyer. Because then when some of the problems come up in your case or the difficult parts come up in your case, they're much more likely to just see them as, oh, no, no, that's not what it is. I believe Tragos and how he's explaining this, not Daniel. So it's like
Right.
it really depends on what the jury is feeling. And sometimes they get on a side early on, even though they're not supposed to. Sometimes that happens.
So we are 17 days into testimony. We should be 18, but as I was on my way to court on Tuesday, we get an email, right? And the court system says court has been canceled today due to unavoidable circumstances. That's all they provided. I was later able to find out that Karen Reed was sick, and that's the reason. And her dad actually talked about that with me yesterday. He was pretty open.
Well, I mean, she does have MS, as you all know, and so anything that wears on that ability to maintain your health and maintain your strength is and this certainly is something that is bearing on us all, and particularly on her.
I spoke with him after court, and he said that she has MS, Crohn's. I believe he said that she had colon cancer at one point, and that due to how much time she's spending on the defense, she's not sleeping at all. So I guess it's not out of left field to think that this would take its toll.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of situations that everybody's dealing with individually, and sometimes things come up in trial, and we're all human beings. And although we seem like machines sometimes in court, and we just think it's a 6 week or 8 week trial, every day we're going to show up from 9 to 4:30, and we're just going to keep doing it. Then we go home and we work on the case. Things happen. You get burned out. You can't show up. You can't wake up. You can't get out of bed. You feel sick. You feel dizzy. You feel spent, and you tell the judge, and it's like, there's nothing we can do, judge. She can't show up, whether it's she's sick or she literally can't get out of bed because she's so exhausted. That's a legitimate reason the judge found. We canceled court for a day, and we're back at it.
So there's definitely something going around, or at least there was. I was out, well, I worked through it, but for 2 weeks I had a cold. I know that another reporter, two other reporters from competing stations in Boston had the same thing. One
Yeah.
has it now. So there's definitely something going around that courthouse. We're kind of all packed into this small room. There's air conditioning there, but the ventilation isn't great. So not a big surprise that some people would be falling ill.
Mhm.
So we've moved into more of the science, or at least the last couple of days here, the science portion of the prosecution's case. There is a state police forensic scientist, Maureen Hartnett, who's been on the stand, and the jury got to see a lot of the close-up pictures of the damage to Karen Reed's Lexus, to the taillight. They showed a dent, they showed scratches, things of that sort. How important do you think it is that Brennan was able to, spend a lot of time, I think more than Lally did in the first trial, with those pictures and having her delineate exactly, okay, this little stamp here points to this piece of damage here.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I think the way he's doing it, like you said, is better. He's going more into depth, but it still seems quicker. These witnesses are getting up. We know exactly why they're there. You can write it down in one line. This witness is there to show that there are scratches and dents. This witness is there to show that there was glass on the bumper. This witness is there to say that he photographed this at the scene. This witness is there to say that he came to the Sally Port, he took the pictures on this date, and this is what it looked like. So I think it's easy for the jury to kind of track what they're doing. And foundationally, they have to provide this evidence to the jury before they get to their experts, which is really going to be the most important part of the entire trial for the Commonwealth.
So the jury learned about the traveling hair and the traveling glass. This is one of the things that I have a hard time reconciling. The scientist said there was a piece of hair, a single piece of hair on the right rear quarter panel, and there was glass that was on the bumper. And one of the big questions here is this car went from Canton to Dighton, Massachusetts, which I think is like 30 miles, and then state police pick it up, bring it back to Canton. How the heck does that hair and glass stay on the car in a snowstorm?
Well, that's a great question. And this is a perfect example of what we started talking about, where if you're on one side, you see it one way. If you're on the other, you see it as an impossibility, right? If you think Karen Read is innocent, this was clearly planted. He put it there right before she showed up. It couldn't even stay there long enough for them to take a picture. It doesn't make any sense. But if you're on the other side, you say, how do you explain this? How would John O'Keefe's hair have gotten here? How would debris get into the sweatshirt and the shirt, which the defense team is saying, you don't know where that debris came from. You don't know how that evidence was collected. It was mixed up in the bag with other things. Like, that really feels weak. But then other people are saying that proves a car and that light came into contact with John O'Keefe. And that's how the glass, I guess, is from the cocktail glass stayed on there. Logically speaking, I just don't understand how that's possible. Brennan is starting to try to get into water being an adhesive and things like that, trying to explain it to jurors that are, again, with him, how it is possible, because it doesn't seem possible. But those are the factors that the Commonwealth needs a jury to believe to try and prove this car came into contact with John O'Keefe.
And one of the things Alessi did was he showed what appeared to be snow melt or water melting off the back, and he just let that play for 10 minutes. There was no audio to it, but even when a fire truck drove by, there was a siren. He said, stop. I want the jury to be locked in and watch this, what appeared to be snow kind of falling down in the car. It's just from the surveillance, the camera's already rolling. And so that raises another question. It's like, okay, you also had then this sort of snow melt coming down, but it still stayed on there. And also Alessi ties everything back to Proctor. Like, oh, did he touch all this evidence? And I think there was this suggestion that, Michael Proctor has this folder in his hand that, maybe, I think it was former Canton Police Chief Ken Berkowitz, who, is seen next to him, that maybe Berkowitz handed Proctor a piece of the taillight. So it's very subtle, but they're trying to create that reasonable doubt. And is that the only way that they can do that? Just being that subtle? Can they, without, I guess you'd get just 1,000 objections, right?
Yeah. And I mean, you're trying to put in enough into evidence to where you have a reasonable inference you can argue in closing argument. So they set all these things up subtly and they're going to hammer it home in closing argument. But I think Alessi, I don't remember who did the cross of these types of witnesses in the first trial, but I think he's doing a considerably better job as well. Even though we said the Commonwealth is kind of presenting it tighter, you can see what they're trying to get out of these witnesses. But Alessi is turning a seemingly simple witness for the Commonwealth into somebody that creates a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of what ifs and possibilities. And is that really what we're looking at? And picking away at their credibility. Is that a reflection, or is it actually two stickers? How does the glass stay on there with, these winds? I can't remember if it was 15 miles an hour, 50
Right.
miles an hour. How is it possible that this is happening? And the witnesses have been a little bit nervous to admit some of the mistakes they may make, even if they're simple. And I think if you just admit it and you move on, it's not as big of a deal. But Alessi will sit there and go through the mud with you laboriously to make
Yes,
sure the
he
jury
will.
understands that is obviously a reflection. So you can call it whatever you want. And he's going to keep asking the questions and say, I can't testify, but are you saying that's really not a reflection?
And I did think that the scientist Maureen Hartnett, though, compared to some of the other law enforcement officials, and maybe like Sergeant Buchanan, who seemed at times maybe a little combative, she seems very buttoned up. That
Agreed.
she's just trying to. Here's the answer to my question, yes or no, without this long sort of explanation. And is that something? I would think that the jury picks up on when they see different members of law enforcement sort of treating the cross differently. One might treat it as just a simple yes or no. The other may treat it more argumentatively.
Yeah, I think the defense hopes so. The defense hopes you notice a difference, the people that are connected with everybody else. That's why, and I think it's a mistake by Brennan. Sometimes Brennan will say, you don't know this person, you don't know this person. So he points out the ones that don't have any connections. And I think those are the ones that are less argumentative on cross. So it's almost working into the defense's theory. And if you notice with that witness, she also answered multiple times, that's not my job. It's
Right.
not what I do, not my expertise. But that didn't stop Bob Alessi from saying, so you don't know how the debris got there. You don't know how long the damage was there. You have no clue. You're just testifying that it was there on February 1st. You have no clue. And Proctor had all sorts of opportunity before you got to it, right? So that diminishes a lot of what the Commonwealth is trying to build as this credible base for what their experts are, because she has to be right. Because the experts are relying on what she gathered and when she gathered it. Because if it's messed up from her part, it's garbage in, garbage out for those experts.
And I don't like to handicap the jury. I just feel like, as we talked earlier, impression. What someone may see a juror do something and interpret it one way, I may see it another way. But I actually did, for the first time, feel comfortable because it was so obvious. They were talking about the solo cups, and Alessi said to Maureen Hartnett, "Hey, have you ever been handed evidence this way before?" And one of the jurors literally started laughing, like,
Ah.
and I was
honestly good. I don't even, their vote could still be guilty at the end of the day.
Yes.
Good. You should not think that that's okay or that that's how law enforcement should work in our country. And Brennan got up with that witness on redirect and said, the red solo cups, you don't know the conditions of how they gather that information. She's like, no. And he tried to go into why it was reasonable. There was an objection. I believe it was sustained. They went to sidebar and he kind of moved on, but he was trying to make excuses for it or say how great it was like other law enforcement. And I just, that I find condescending to the jury, that you feel like you could trick them into thinking that that was appropriate collection of evidence. Now, is it not important to prove Karen Read did this? That's probably what I would go with if I was the prosecutor, because you don't necessarily need those red solo cups to prove she hit him with a car. But to try and act like that was good police work, to me, is just beyond me.
Right, because they never tested the blood inside, correct? Is that, I think we learned that yesterday.
Yeah.
They never actually tested it. So it doesn't really have an evidentiary component in this case at all. We also heard from John O'Keefe's niece. She's a minor, so obviously we're not going to identify her in any way other than that. Her test, and they did not call the nephew, so there's a younger nephew too. So most people know that John was raising his niece and nephew. He stood up, took on that responsibility. Single dad, working as a Boston police officer. I think that shows a lot about his character. Essentially, she was asked a lot about what life was like inside the home, because Karen, would slept there a lot and stayed there a lot. And she, it wasn't, I think they did a really good job of trying to make the jury think that, Karen could be hot and cold, that the niece said that, Karen, yeah, was nice to me, but sometimes she would be cold. Sometimes she'd seem to favor my brother. And she also talked about towards the weeks leading up to the death of John, that the relationship had deteriorated, that essentially that they were fighting a lot more. She overheard one argument where she says John told her that the relationship had run its course, and Karen didn't want to hear that. What are your thoughts about having the niece come on the stand and talk about this? I guess she was 14 at the time all this happened. She's been through hell and back, that young lady. And I thought she was very poised.
And that's what I was going to ask you. So before I even answer, you were there and I wasn't. I'm just reading your reporting on it. What was her demeanor like? Because I heard there were some things she maybe even like made a joke about an 8th grade boyfriend broke up with her and people giggled. What was her demeanor like?
Yeah, she did. She was talking about her state of mind, and I don't remember exactly, but she said, "Hey, listen, I just had, my 8th grade crush break up with me, or I broke, and I thought it was just so honest and so, this is a kid. Yeah, I thought that represented her well, that she was able to do that. No, I mean, I think one of the things that you noticed, and the defense brought this up, is she didn't call Karen Karen. She calls Karen the
Right. I
defendant.
thought
You
that was
know, it's like she
interesting.
never did that before. So I think in terms of doing the mission that the prosecution wanted her to do, she accomplished it well. And David Yannetti crossed her, but in a very sort of soft manner,
Right.
as I think he should have. Just saying, hey, you didn't. You always used to call her Karen, right? You never called her the defendant. And I do think, though, she is important because she gets you inside the home. She gets you the inner workings of the relationship, and that argument that that the prosecution's trying to make, that Karen knew things were exploding in her relationship with John, and she just wasn't going to have that.
Yeah, it seems like, so based on that, it seems like she was not quite the same as Peggy O'Neill, who was pretty emotional, could barely get through her testimony, and there was no cross examination because she didn't really testify to a lot of facts of what happened even after the fact. But with John's niece, she was able to actually testify to some facts, give us how the relationship was going, what happened that morning, what Karen was doing and saying when she was on the phone. So there were actually some facts she could confirm and be consistent with a lot of the Commonwealth's theory of the case. But then at the same time, the defense was able to get up and be consistent with their theory where, yeah, Karen might have gotten mad. Their relationship wasn't perfect. She was fighting with him, but never anything physical. And, crossing that line is what the prosecution has to prove that happened that night, right? Which is different from what happened in Aruba and any other
Yep.
time that Karen and John got into a fight. So I think it sounds like from all the reports that each lawyer did what they needed to do
Yep.
to represent what they believe the justice is in this case and to push towards the just result they think is necessary. And I think sometimes you have to call minor witnesses, even though it's very difficult, and you have to handle them with care and do your best as you are an adult and a professional lawyer, and treat them the way you know they should be treated in this scenario.
And I think probably the most important thing that the niece said during all her testimony was 4:30 in the morning. She's sleeping on the morning of the 29th. She says Karen Reed comes busting in her room frantic. And one of the things that the niece says Karen Reed said to her is, could I have done something? So then, that adds another layer. You've heard it from multiple witnesses so far saying that Karen raised those questions, and that's sort of that's right out of the gate, right? That's the first person we know she talks to that morning, and it raises that issue. I think Sergeant Uri Buchanan was on the stand the last time that we spoke, so we didn't really get to talk a lot about him. He was on the stand for 3 days, mostly the defense questioning him. What were your thoughts of his testimony?
Yeah, I think that some of it was fine, but the majority of it, the prosecution set him up to fail, in my opinion. Either he didn't prepare on purpose or they just didn't prepare him enough. There was way too much I don't recall and I don't know and I don't remember, and I have to review that. For the guy you're basically trying to say is the lead investigator, even though he's not the lead investigator, he's the supervisor to the case agent who he doesn't want to call the lead investigator. He argued about semantics over and over again. He gave the excuse that English is his third language, which you never want to have a witness say, especially when they're explaining things using words in the English language the way that he was. I just thought his credibility was shot over and over again. Most of it surrounding Proctor, what Proctor did, how he was basically sitting there instead of Proctor, trying to say, handwriting wasn't Proctor's or Proctor might not have done that. Having him read the Higgins text messages, I think, was a great move by the defense to try and push that third party culprit, get that evidence in, because we don't know who the Commonwealth is going to call. We're hearing, or at least I'm hearing reports, you're probably the one giving the reports, that it might not be Proctor, it might not be Higgins, they might not be calling anybody else that was inside 34 Fairview, like other McCabe's or Alberts. And so if you're the defense and you don't know if that's coming, you can't wait. You've got to get your theory out. You've got to get your third party culprit. You've got to get your Bowdoin defense information out. And I thought they did a great job with that with Uri Buchanan on the stand.
So are you saying that essentially in the situations where there were maybe protocol wasn't followed or things weren't done right, that he should have just take the L, not dance around, not sort of, I thought it was interesting. One of the things, Proctor called Karen Reed a lot of things in the texts. And one of the things that Buchanan responded, well, this is First Amendment right. He's allowed to do that. And I thought, especially like, I don't think maybe there's 2% of the population that would be okay with Proctor's text, but 98% of people are going to say that's absolutely offensive, crude, over the line. And I was just surprised that even for that he didn't take the L and just say, listen, I didn't write the text. Yeah, I
Right.
liked one. And he said that he actually said he liked one of the texts that was offensive that Proctor wrote. He said, well, I didn't even read it.
Because it was
That
on
was
his
his
Apple Watch, and
response.
he just put the thumbs up on his Apple Watch. He acknowledged it, is what he said, and that's
Yes.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like even that I would have been fine with. I didn't like it. I barely read it. I just acknowledged it. I gave him a thumbs up. I didn't respond. I wasn't talking back and forth. I think that's a fine explanation. But you're right. You just condemn that and you say it was horrible. He shouldn't have said it. He shouldn't have said it about her. He shouldn't have said it about anybody because anybody that reads that, regardless, I don't want you to say that about me, Ted, let alone if you actually have some authority and control about what happens to my life. And that's how you're talking about me. That's how you think about me. That's what you're just free to say. Obviously, the First Amendment even comment was a complete swing and miss. That's not what it means. That's not what it protects. Proctor didn't go to jail for what he said. Like that's just completely missing the point. And like you said, so obviously making excuses and losing credibility, I believe, with the jury, regardless of what if they're with the Commonwealth or not, because I don't think anybody on the jury is going to think it was okay what was in those texts.
Through Proctor, I'm sorry, through Buchanan, the jury heard about the Ford Edge. So, this has always been on the periphery of the conversation, but it seems so important that the Plow driver, Lucky Lock, help me with his name, Lochran.
Laughlin, I think it's
Yeah,
Laughlin.
he drives by, and we're dealing with a snowstorm that night. He drives by, plows at 2:30 in the morning, does not see a body. He previously testified. He has not testified yet, but he testified in the last trial. Comes by again at 3:30, also no body, but that there's this Ford Edge parked there. He'll take the stand at some point, I'm sure, but I don't know. From hearing what the jurors said in the last trial, from the last trial, obviously he testified, but I don't feel like that really hit home with the jurors, maybe as much as it could have. Why do you think that seems to be more of a side avenue in this case and not like something that they're like pounding the table on?
So I don't know if he's going to be called. If I was the defense, you might have gotten enough out with Yuri Buchanan to not call him because I believe I remember some of the jurors that I heard speaking out didn't find him credible or thought
Yeah.
that the prosecution did a good enough job to say he didn't report this or why didn't he report this at this time and can we really believe? And the officer said they didn't really find him credible. That's why they didn't go down that road. But if you're really talking about a Bowden defense and officers not investigating all the leads and doing what you know you should do when you know the information, I think it's out there that they knew this information. Whether they found it credible or not, they should have taken steps to investigate it, and they just didn't. And that goes to reasonable doubt. That goes to the Bowden defense. And I think they may have gotten enough out for closing argument. And Ted, you're making a point here. Why aren't they pounding the table with it? How many things can you pound the table with?
Right.
Right? You got to pick and choose as a defense. It's part of strategy. There's so much going on in this case that I think they're trying to pick their best arguments and not just pound the table with everything to where the jury's like, all right, relax. My eardrums are hurting. You're pounding the table so much. And it's a tough thing for a defense jury. And that's what keeps us up at night. Are we picking the right things? As lawyers at trial, are we picking the right things to pound the table with?
And I get the impression that it's fluid too.
Oh, yeah.
The defense is meeting every night, and maybe they feel like, hey, that's stuck. Let's get more questions along, that line.
And I
And
think the
I
public
yeah,
and what the public is saying and the questions they have and what they don't pick up on, I have noticed almost first thing, like Alessi came back up and said at the beginning of a cross that was continued with that scientist, was there any debris, sand, or anything inside the light, which is what everybody was talking about in
right,
my chat. And I was like, I don't know. They didn't ask the question. It was the first question he asked. And Brennan came back and said, okay, so you looked at the whole car, and a lot of people in the chat were talking about, yeah, that stuff could have gone there anytime. There was thousands of miles on the car. Brennan's like, you looked at the rest of the car, no dents and scratches that you noticed except for that one spot.
so
So both sides watching what the public is talking about because it is a pretty good representation of the jury, especially if you take out the people that are just screaming at everybody, not even looking at this with rational thought.
yeah.
But if you say the people that have legitimate respectful questions as a lawyer, that's important and you should listen to that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a smart play. I think you're right because the the public is representative of the 18 people in the jury box. And it is so strange, 18. I mean, it's like huge. Like it's just
Big.
all these people, sitting there staring at you because we're kind of directly facing them. And we lost along the way during the first trial. I felt like we were losing one a week. I mean, this jury's just rock solid so far. Like, you haven't lost one. There haven't been any incidents of issues that have come up like last trial where people were kicked off. So let's see if we can go the distance. I think, trying to look at the dates, I think we're into June probably, like, for when testimony might wrap and we might get done, might get a verdict. The defense still has I'm sorry, the prosecution still has a number of important witnesses to call.
Oh,
We
yeah.
hear more about the DNA, I think, coming up.
Yeah.
And of course, that's an important component for them. And then I think the plan, at least from the defense, is maybe have more witnesses than they did last time. It was a pretty short presentation the first time. I think they were way more confident the first time around that was going to be a slam dunk, that they didn't have to worry about putting on as vigorous a defense. But I think that proved wrong because of what happened with the mistrial. Is there a way for you, the way I guess I value how you see things so far. If you were sitting in that box, could you convict on second degree murder?
No way. I mean, I don't. In fairness to the Commonwealth, they're not done,
Yeah.
and they have come nowhere near proving any crimes have occurred so far. You have to have the accident reconstructionist explain how those marks were made, where the car hit him, how his body moved, how the grass stains got there, how the injury on the back of his head, which was the fatal blow, how that got there. They say they have witnesses. They say the data and the science is all going to be in their favor. So we're staying open. Presumption of innocence. She's innocent right now. It would be an easy not guilty vote, but they still have their case in chief to put on to prove her guilt. And they should have to pull every juror into the guilty bucket before they get there. And if you're talking about scheduling, it's not just over once the defense's, vigorous case in chief is done. Hank Brennan has made it pretty clear he's going to put on a rebuttal. And at the very least, dog bite experts and responses to some of the experts the defense is going to bring. So I do expect there to be a rebuttal this time, which is going to
Okay, I
extend
forgot
the
about
case
that.
even
That's
more.
right. That's right. So exactly. And he already has lined some of those people up. And we've had hearings about some of those people. Right.
Yes.
So then does that essentially mean that his witnesses get the last word?
On some things, yes. Depending on what it is, he's got to be in response to what the defense does. But he can hold back some witnesses. He can bring back an Albert or a McCabe if
Yeah.
he really wants to, depending on how the defense cases goes. So he's going to hold some of that back. Usually, you don't want rebuttal to be days and days and days. It's usually shorter, but you get out what you need to and what you need to respond to the defense's strongest points.
Okay. Peter Tragos, the lawyer I am the reporter I'm hoping you're getting to know because I know Peter is bringing so many people to this conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time, your input. As I said before, I know people, I see, I talk to people here, around the courthouse who do follow this with you. And thank you for your insight. Hopefully, if you have time for us, we'll do it again. We got, another full week coming up next week, this week, coming forward. And thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Happy to.
All right. Take care, Peter. Thank you.